The year was 1868, and the frontier was a cruel and unrelenting place. Beneath the endless stretch of sky, a lone figure trudged through the dry, brittle grass, her breath shallow, her steps faltering. Helena Blackstone had seen many hardships in her 50 years, but none quite like this. She had always believed she was a survivor, a wife, a mother, a woman who had endured the death of her children, one by one, lost to fever, to the unforgiving winters, to the relentless march of fate. When her husband Richard had fallen to an outlaw's bullet, she had mourned but pressed on, clinging to the last semblance of purpose in a land that respected neither age nor grief. The settlers had taken her in then, if only out of practicality. A pair of hands, even aged ones, could still be useful on the long journey westward, but now that usefulness had worn thin. The wind whispered through the sparse trees, carrying with it the muted murmurs of the camp. Helena sat apart, her back against a gnarled cottonwood, listening, though she did not need to hear the words to know their meaning. The looks, the wary glances, the dwindling rations. She had seen it coming. Samuel Pike stood with the others, his weathered face turned toward the fire. A man who saw the world in simple terms, what could be used and what could be left behind. He was not cruel, not in the way of outlaws or the soldiers who burned Comanche villages to the ground, but his kindness was the kind that had limits, and Helena had reached them. "We can't carry dead weight," Pike said, his voice low but firm. "She's not dead weight," came a hesitant reply. Young Thomas, perhaps, one of the few who still met her eyes when he spoke to her. "She can't keep up." Pike's voice did not waver. "She can't shoot, she can't ride well enough to flee if we're set upon. We don't have enough supplies to spare." Silence followed, the kind of silence that sealed fates. Helena forced herself to rise, her body aching with the effort. She had always known she was not truly one of them. Richard had been the one they respected, the one with the rifle, the strength, the plans. Without him, she was just another mouth to feed, another body slowing them down. She stepped toward the fire, and the men fell silent. She was grateful for that, at least. No pretense, no false sympathy. "I understand," she said, her voice. Even no one spoke. She looked at them, these men and women who had once been her lifeline, and saw only relief in their faces. Not grief, not regret, just relief that she had made it easier for them. Pike nodded. "We leave at first light." There was nothing more to say. She did not sleep that night. Morning came, and with it the departure. Helena stood by as the settlers packed their wagons, cinched their saddles, prepared for the journey that she would not be a part of. She had been given a canteen of water, a small knife, and nothing else. Not even the old mare she had ridden on this long journey. That, too, was deemed a resource too valuable to waste. She watched as the last wagon rolled forward, the dust rising in its wake. Not a single person turned back. And then she was alone. The silence pressed in around her, heavier than she had anticipated. For weeks she had lived by the sounds of the group, the murmured conversations, the creak of wagon wheels, the snorting of horses. Now there was only the wind, the rustling of dry grass, the distant cry of a hawk. She sat, staring. At the ground, at the boot prints fading beneath the shifting dust. She should move. She should find shelter, water, something. But for long minutes she did nothing. When she finally forced herself to stand, the weight of her solitude settled into her bones. She walked east first, back the way they had come, but after an hour she realized the futility of it. There was no going back, not to civilization, not to safety. The nearest town was days away, and she had neither horse nor provisions to make the journey. South, then. The land was harsh, but she had heard there was water somewhere in that direction. If she could find a stream, she might last another day, maybe two. The sun climbed higher, and her steps grew slower. Her throat burned, her breath coming in short, labored bursts. She had never been a strong woman. Richard had always told her she was delicate, made for softer things. She had believed him, but now she had no choice but to be something else. By midday, she had finished half her water. She forced herself to ration the rest, but the heat pressed against her, relentless, uncaring. Her skin burned beneath its gaze, her bonnet doing little to protect her. The first time she stumbled, she caught herself. The second time, She did. Not. She lay there, panting, the dust clinging to her skin. This was it, then. She closed her eyes. The sound of hooves came first, distant, rhythmic. She forced herself to open her eyes, but the glare of the sun blurred everything into shadow and light. A figure on horseback. She blinked. Maybe it was a mirage. The rider came closer. The shape solidified. A man, lean and powerful, his dark hair loose around his shoulders, his face unreadable. His horse moved with effortless grace, the kind of control that came from a lifetime in the saddle, a Comanche. Fear sparked in Helena's chest, but it was distant, dulled by exhaustion. He was young, no more than 35, she guessed, but there was something in his gaze that felt older. A warrior's eyes. She tried to move, to scramble backward, but her limbs refused to obey. He studied her, his expression giving nothing. Away. Then, without a word, he dismounted. She tensed, but he did not reach for a weapon. Instead, he crouched beside her, fingers brushing against the canteen at her side. He lifted it, checking its weight, then set it down again. His gaze returned to her face, assessing, measuring. She had heard stories of Comanche warriors, how they raided settlements, took captives. She knew what could happen to a woman alone in the wilderness. Please, she whispered, though she did not know what she was begging for. The warrior did not reply. Instead, he stood, grabbed her arm and hauled her to her feet as if she weighed nothing. Her legs buckled, but he held her steady. For a long moment they simply stood there, the wind stirring the dust between them. Then, without ceremony, he lifted her onto his horse, swung up behind her and turned the animal westward. Helena closed her eyes. She had been left to die. But death, it seemed, was not yet ready for her. Helena Blackstone awoke to the scent of smoke and the rhythmic sounds of horses moving in the distance. The air was thick with the scent of tanned leather, earth, and something faintly metallic. Blood, perhaps. Her body ached from the jarring ride, her head pounding as she forced her eyes open. Above her, the sky had softened into evening hues, a blend of deep orange and purple stretching across the horizon. She was lying on a blanket of rough animal hide, its texture unfamiliar against her skin. The camp around her was alive with quiet movement, men tending to their horses, women crouched over fire pits, voices carrying in a language she did not understand. Helena pushed herself up on her elbows, a spike of pain shooting through her shoulders. A shadow moved nearby and she turned her head sharply. The warrior who had taken her sat a few feet away, sharpening the blade of a long knife with slow, deliberate strokes. The firelight cast flickering shadows over his face, highlighting the strong angles of his jaw and the unreadable depth of his dark eyes. He had not bound her hands. A small mercy. She swallowed, her throat raw. Where am I? The warrior did not look up. He continued sharpening his blade, the rhythmic scrape of stone against metal filling the silence between them. Helena licked her cracked lips, her mind spinning. You understand me, don't you? She pressed, her voice hoarse. This time, he glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he spoke. You are in my camp. His English was accented but clear. Helena's breath caught. He had understood her all along. She sat up fully now, wincing at the stiffness in her limbs. The world around her still felt surreal, as though she had stepped into a story told around a settler's fire. Tales of warriors who stole women, of savagery and bloodshed. But there was no cruelty in his gaze, no immediate danger she could discern. The warrior she now realized was her captor studied her for a moment before returning to his blade. Oh, you were dying, he said simply. Helena pressed a hand to her forehead, trying to will herself into clarity. You saved me. A slight nod. Nothing more. She exhaled sharply, her breath unsteady. Why? The warrior stopped sharpening. The knife. His dark eyes flickered over her, assessing. Would you rather be dead? The question landed heavy between them. Helena swallowed hard, memories of the wasteland flashing through her mind, the unyielding heat, the thirst, the utter certainty that she had been walking to her grave. She had already felt death's presence, and she had been ready to accept it, but she was still here. She turned her gaze toward the camp. Other Comanche sat in small clusters, tending to tasks with an easy familiarity. their voices weaving together like the rise and fall of wind. A woman passed nearby, glancing at Helena with unreadable eyes before moving on. "Are you going to kill me?" she asked at last. The warrior's lip twitched, whether in amusement or something else she could not tell. "If I wanted you dead, you would not be sitting here." It wasn't a reassurance, but it wasn't a threat either. She wrapped her arms around herself, willing the shivers of exhaustion from her bones. "What's your name?" For a moment, he didn't answer. Then, as though deciding something, he said, "Talon." Helena let the name settle on her tongue. Short, strong. It suited him. She took a slow breath, steadying herself. "What are you going to do with me?" Talon sheathed his knife. "That is not for me to decide." A cold weight settled in her stomach. She wasn't a prisoner of just one man. She was at the mercy of an entire camp. A wave of noise rose as another group of warriors returned, riding in with the easy confidence of men who belonged to the land more than the land belonged to them. Talon rose as an older man approached, his presence commanding. He spoke in their language, his voice low and measured, and though Helena could not understand the words, she understood their weight. Talon responded, his tone calm but firm. A few others gathered, listening. Helena forced herself to remain still, her heart hammering as she saw some of them glance in her direction. She had seen such looks before, the kind men gave when deciding what to do with something of little value. A woman's voice cut through the air. Helena turned to see a figure step forward, an older woman, perhaps near Helena's own age, her expression unreadable. She spoke sharply, gesturing toward Helena, and the conversation shifted, the tension subtly easing. Talon inclined his head in response. The older woman then turned her gaze to Helena, sharp and measuring. After a moment, she approached. "You." "We'll come," she said, her accent thick but her English clear. Helena hesitated, then pushed herself to her feet. The older woman, who Helena realized was no mere bystander, studied her before nodding toward one of the larger fires. Helena followed, her body aching with every step. As they sat, the woman handed Helena a wooden bowl filled with something thick and steaming. "Eat." Helena looked at the food, some sort of stew. Its scent earthy and unfamiliar. Her stomach twisted in protest, but hunger won over caution. She lifted the bowl to her lips, tasting the rich broth, the tender bits of meat, and root vegetables. The woman watched her for a long moment before speaking. "You are his now." Helena choked on the broth, coughing hard. She wiped her mouth, her pulse thrumming in her ears. "What?" The woman's expression remained steady. "Talon saved your life. That means he is responsible for you. You are his woman now." A cold sensation crawled up Helena's spine. She set the bowl down, her fingers tightening. "I didn't ask for that." The woman shrugged, unbothered. "Ask or not, it is done." Helena shook her head. "That's not how—" But she stopped herself. What argument could she make? This was not the world of the settlers, of churches and marriage certificates and quiet, bitter negotiations between men. This was something else entirely. She turned her gaze toward Talon, who stood at the edge of the firelight, speaking to the others, his expression impassive. He did not look at her. A strange sensation coiled in Helena's chest, something between fear and resignation. She had been left for dead. Now she had been claimed by a man who had no reason to keep her alive, except that he had chosen to. What? That choice meant she did not yet understand. The woman beside her watched her carefully. "You will learn," she said at last, and there was something in her tone, not kindness, not cruelty, but certainty. Helena met her gaze and, for the first time since waking in this strange place, understood that she had been given something unexpected. A second chance. What she did with it was yet to be seen. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and the lingering smoke from the dying embers of last night's fire. Helena stirred beneath the thick buffalo hide that had been given to her, the unfamiliar weight both a comfort and a reminder of where she was. She had spent her first full night in the Comanche camp, neither bound nor caged, but far from free. The sky above was still streaked with dawn's first light when she forced herself up, wincing at the stiffness in her limbs. The world here did not wait for anyone to gather themselves. Around her, the camp was already alive. Warriors prepared for the hunt, their movements swift and assured. Women gathered near the fires, speaking in their rolling, rhythmic tongue, some laughing, others working in silence. Children darted between tents, their joy an odd contrast to the hardness of this life. No one paid her much mind, though she felt their eyes when they thought she wasn't looking. Talon stood near the horses, speaking in low tones with another man. His posture was as unreadable as ever, but there was no mistaking the authority in his stance. He was not just another warrior. He was something more. He had claimed responsibility for her, yet beyond that, he had said little to her since their arrival. Helena swallowed the unease that tightened her throat. She had spent her entire life knowing her place in the world, first as a daughter, then as a wife. Even after Richard's death, she had understood her role among the settlers. But here, she was something undefined. She could not go back to the life she knew. But she could not yet see what shape this new life would take. She forced herself to stand and move toward the fire, her stomach hollow with hunger. The older woman, Red Moon, as she had been called, glanced at her, then gestured toward a bowl. Helena hesitated only a moment before accepting it. She had learned enough in her years to know that refusing food was not just foolish but disrespectful. She ate in silence, the broth warm and rich, filling the empty spaces inside her. Red Moon watched her with sharp eyes. "You will work today." Helena swallowed her mouthful carefully. "Work?" Red Moon tilted her head slightly. "Do you think you will sit and do nothing?" Helena stiffened. "I don't expect to sit, but I don't know what you expect of me." Red Moon considered her. "You are not a warrior, you do not hunt, but you can learn other things." She gestured toward the group of women near the fires. "Come." Helena hesitated, then followed. The morning passed in a blur of unfamiliar tasks. She was given roots to grind, pelts to soften, food to prepare. Her hands, once accustomed to sewing and tending a garden, fumbled with the unfamiliar work. The other women did not mock her, but neither did they make it easy. She was expected to learn by watching, by trying, by failing and trying again. Midday, sweat clung to the back of her neck. Her arms ached and her fingers were raw, and yet something inside her had settled. The work, however foreign, was grounding. For the first time since being left to die, she felt something close to purpose. She paused to wipe her brow when she sensed someone watching her. She turned, to find Talon standing a short distance away, his expression unreadable as always. "You work," he observed. Helena straightened. "I survive." A flicker of something crossed his face. Approval, perhaps. "Good." He turned away, as if that was all he had wanted to see. Something inside Helena bristled. She was not a child needing praise, but she also understood that in this place respect was earned, not given. She had no illusions about what she was to them, a burden, a strange thing that did not yet belong. But she could not afford to be useless. The afternoon sun burned high when the men returned, carrying the spoils of their hunt. The camp came alive with movement, the rhythm of survival taking over. Helena watched as the warriors dismounted, as the women moved to meet them, as the world seemed to shift seamlessly into motion. Talon approached, carrying something wrapped in cloth. He stopped before her, his dark eyes steady. "For you." Helena frowned, glancing down at the bundle he extended. Slowly she took it and unwrapped the cloth, revealing a small knife with a bone handle. It was simple but well made, the blade sharp and clean. She looked up at him, confused. "Why?" Talon shrugged. "You should not be defenseless." The weight of it in her hand felt heavier than it should. She swallowed, curling her fingers around the handle. She was not sure if this was a gift or a test. Perhaps it was both. That night, as the fires burned low, Helena sat near the edge of the camp, the knife resting in her lap. She traced the ridges of the handle with her fingers, her mind restless. She was not foolish. This life was not kind to women who did not have a place. She could not be a warrior, but she could make herself useful. She could become something more than a settler abandoned to the wild. A rustling nearby made her look up. Talon stood a few feet away, watching her in that quiet way of his. "You are thinking," he said. Helena let out a breath. "I do that, often." A small, almost amused glint touched his eyes. "You are different from the women here." She lifted the knife slightly. "And yet here I am." Talon nodded as if that answered something for him. He stepped closer, his gaze unreadable. "You do not fear me." Helena met his gaze, holding steady. "Should I?" For the first time, something close to a smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "No." The moment stretched between them, neither speaking, neither looking away. Then, with the ease of someone who had already made his decision, Talon stepped back. "Sleep," he said simply. "Tomorrow, you learn more." Helena watched him go, her fingers tightening around the knife. She was still learning what she was in this place, but one thing was certain: she was not done yet. The first sign of trouble was the horses. They shifted uneasily, their ears flicking back, nostrils flaring at something unseen beyond the tree line. Helena had learned to trust their instincts. Animals sensed danger before humans did. She glanced toward the warriors sharpening arrows. Near the fire, their movements slowing as they too noticed the shift in the air. A storm was coming, not of wind and rain, but of blood and reckoning. Talon appeared beside her, his presence as steady as the earth beneath her feet. He had always moved like the land itself, like he belonged to it in a way no settler ever could. His eyes swept the horizon, narrowing at the shifting shadows between the trees. "They are close," he murmured. A cold knot of understanding tightened in Helena's stomach. The settlers had come. She had always known it was possible. A lone woman disappearing into Comanche lands was an easy thing to forget, but the memory of her abandonment might still linger in those who had left her behind. And now, perhaps they had come to finish what they had started. Talon's expression was unreadable, but she sensed the calculation in his gaze. His people were not unprepared, but this was not a battle they had sought. "They will not leave without a fight," he said. Helena's hands curled into fists at her sides. Once she might have prayed for this moment, for the sight of Samuel, Pike and his men, for the chance to stand among her own kind again. But she was no longer certain who her kind were. The distant snap of a branch sent tension coiling through the camp. Shadows shifted, revealing figures emerging from the trees. The settlers came on horseback, rifles slung over their shoulders, their faces hard with determination. Pike rode at the front, his sharp gaze scanning the camp with a mixture of triumph and revulsion. Helena stepped forward before she could stop herself. Pike's eyes landed on her, widening in something like disbelief. "God above," he muttered, shaking his head. "I'd heard rumors, but I didn't believe it." His gaze swept over her, taking in the buckskin she now wore, the knife strapped at her waist, the way she stood beside Talon rather than behind him. "Look at you, living like an animal." Anger surged through Helena's veins, hot and undeniable. "You left me to die," she said, her voice steady. Pike's mouth pressed into a thin line. "We did what we had to do." A murmur rose from the warriors behind her. Talon remained, silent, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his knife, but Helena could feel the tension rolling off him in waves. He was waiting for her, she realized, waiting to see what she would do. She took another step forward, meeting Pike's gaze. "And now," she demanded, "you've come to fix your mistake, or just bury it?" Pike exhaled sharply, as if speaking to her was an irritation he hadn't anticipated. "We came to bring you back," she laughed, then sharp and bitter. "Back to what?" "To civilization," he snapped. "To your people." Helena's fingers flexed around the handle of her knife. "These are my people." A flicker of unease passed through Pike's face, but he masked it quickly, straightening in his saddle. "I don't mean that. You've been taken. You've been turned." "Turned?" The word tasted like iron on her tongue. "You left me to rot in the dirt, and now you think you get to decide where I belong." His hand drifted toward his rifle. "Don't do this, Helena." The warning was clear. Helena had seen men like Pike her entire life, men who believed the world turned by their hands alone. that women like her were meant to be silent, obedient, grateful. She had been all of those things once. She wasn't anymore. Slowly, deliberately, she reached for the knife at her waist and pulled it free. Pike's expression darkened. "You're making a mistake." She took another step forward. "No," she said, "I'm making a choice." And then the first shot rang out. The crack of the rifle split the air, sending the camp into a flurry of motion. Warriors surged forward, arrows loosing, knives flashing in the firelight. Horses screamed as gunfire erupted, smoke curling into the evening sky. Helena didn't hesitate. She ducked low, moving toward the cover of the nearest shelter as bullets tore through the air. The settlers were outnumbered, but they had come armed, their rifles cutting down anything in their path. A figure lunged toward her, a man she recognized from the wagon train, his face twisted with fury. She moved before she could think, bringing the knife up just as he reached for her. The blade sank deep, hot blood spilling over her fingers. He staggered back, eyes wide, before crumpling to the ground. Her breath came hard and fast. There was no time to dwell on it. She turned just as another shot rang out, this one closer. Talon, he moved like a shadow, weaving through the chaos with a deadly precision. But he was outnumbered. She saw Pike raise his rifle, aiming squarely. Her talons back. Helena moved without thinking. She threw herself toward Pike, colliding with him just as he pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, missing Talon by inches. Pike swore, twisting beneath her, but she fought like an animal, clawing, striking. His fist caught her across the jaw, sending her sprawling into the dirt. But before he could rise, an arrow struck him in the chest. Talon stood a few feet away. Another arrow already notched, his eyes locked on her. The battle was over. The remaining settlers, those who had not been cut down, turned their horses and fled into the trees, their retreat swift and desperate. Helena sat up slowly, her body aching, her breath coming in short, uneven bursts. Pike's body lay still beside her, the life gone from his eyes. She exhaled sharply, her pulse thrumming with adrenaline. Talon approached, his gaze unreadable. He crouched before her, studying her as though seeing her for the first time. "You thought," she nodded, swallowing hard. "You killed." Another nod. He reached out, his fingers brushing over her bruised cheek, his touch feather-light. "And you did not run." She met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "No," she whispered. "I did not." A long silence stretched between them before he finally nodded. The fires burned low as the camp settled. The dead gathered, the wounded tended to. Helena sat near the edge of it all, watching, feeling the weight of the night settle into her bones. She had chosen this. She had stood her ground, and now there was no going back. Talon sat beside her, his presence quiet, solid. "You are not the woman they left behind," he said after a moment. Helena looked down at her hands, still stained with blood. She thought of the woman she had been, the one who had clung to the past, to the life she had lost. That woman was gone now. She lifted her gaze to his, something steady, something unshaken. "No," she agreed. "I am not." Talon studied her for a moment, then, without a word, handed her his knife. Helena took it without hesitation. The night stretched before them, long and dark. But she was not afraid. She was home. 18-year-old Alice Miller stood at the threshold of the church, her hands trembling at her sides, fingers digging into the folds of the plain dress her mother had forced onto her that morning. The dress itself was lovely, cream-colored, with lace at the sleeves, something meant for a joyful bride. But today it felt like a burial shroud. A firm hand gripped her arm. "You'll do this, Alice," her father's voice rasped low in her ear. "Don't think you'll embarrass me." Thomas Miller was a man without a backbone, but he had always held power over his daughter in the ways that mattered. His fingers dug into her flesh as he pushed her forward, the stink of cheap whiskey thick on his breath. Inside the church, Silas Grayson waited. He stood at the altar, broad-shouldered and towering, a man built by years of survival in the unforgiving frontier. His salt-and-pepper beard barely concealed the deep scars that ran along his jaw, and his dark eyes held the cold calculation of a man who had spent his life taking what he wanted. Alice had seen him only once before, across the town square when he had shot a man for cheating him at cards. His presence alone had sucked the warmth from the air. Now he was to be her husband. The preacher, an aging man whose face was drawn, with worry, shifted uncomfortably. He had no more choice in this than Alice did. His eyes flickered toward the outlaw, then to Thomas, who gave him a sharp nod. "Let's get this over with," Grayson muttered, rolling his shoulders as though... Even this small moment of ceremony irritated him. Alice's feet felt like lead as she was dragged forward. Her mother stood in the pews, her hands clasped, her lips pressed tight to keep from trembling. Margaret Miller had begged Thomas not to do this. Alice knew it, but her mother was as powerless against him as she was. Thomas pushed her forward, one last time, and her hands landed against the rough wool of Grayson's coat. The outlaw's lips curled in amusement. "Eager, aren't you?" His voice was like gravel underfoot. Alice recoiled, but Grayson caught her wrist before she could retreat. The weight of his grip was crushing, unyielding. Now, little dove," he murmured. "No use resisting. You're mine now." The preacher's voice wavered as he began the vows, each word falling like the strike of a hammer, sealing her fate. Alice didn't hear them. Her heart pounded too loudly, and her vision blurred at the edges. "Do you, Alice Miller, take Silas Grayson to be your lawfully wedded husband?" The silence stretched. Her lips parted, but no words came. A sharp pain bloomed at her side. Her father's fingers pinching a warning into her ribs. The word felt like ash in her mouth. "I do." Grayson let out a chuckle, dark and knowing. The preacher hurried to finish. "And do you, Silas Grayson, take this woman—" "I do," he interrupted, before the question could even fully leave the preacher's lips. It was done. Heavy silence settled over the church before Grayson reached out, cupping Alice's chin. His thumb brushed over her cheek, not with affection, but possession. Now that wasn't so hard, was it? His lips crashed against hers, rough and demanding. Alice's hands clenched into fists, but she didn't push him away. She couldn't. When he pulled back, he turned to the gathered crowd and let out a bark of laughter. "Ain't she a beauty? You all best remember, she's mine now. Any man even thinks about touching her, he'll answer to me." No one spoke. No one ever did when Silas Grayson made a claim. The evening sun burned low as the church doors swung open, and Alice was led through the street toward the waiting horses. The town had seen its share of tragedies, but none quite like this. Women clutched their shawls tighter. Men stared at the ground. No one helped her. She was led to Grayson's horse, a massive black stallion that snorted and pawed the dirt. He swung up into the saddle with practiced ease, then reached down and hauled her up with him, as though she weighed nothing. The ride out of town was long and silent. Alice sat stiffly in front of him, her stomach twisting with nausea at the feel of his arm banded around her waist. The reins were in his other hand, but he didn't need them much. The horse knew the way, his breath was warm against her ear. "You're going to be a good wife, aren't you?" Alice didn't answer, a sharp tug at her waist. "I asked you. A question." "Yes," she forced out, hating the way her voice shook. Grayson chuckled again, but he didn't push further. They rode through the wilderness until they reached the hideout, an isolated camp built into the craggy hills, hidden from the law and anyone who might come looking. Alice had never been this far from town before. Here the world belonged to men like Grayson. The outlaws gathered as they rode in, filthy men with leering eyes. Some whistled, others just stared. Alice stared at the ground. Grayson dismounted first, then pulled her down after him. He kept his grip firm on her wrist as he led her into the main cabin. Inside, the space smelled of sweat, whiskey, and something more metallic. Blood. "This is home now," he said, pushing open a door at the end of the hall. The room was small, with a single bed, a chair, and a basin of water that looked weeks old. "Don't get any ideas about leaving. You wouldn't last a night out there." Alice didn't move. Grayson let out a slow breath and turned to face her fully. For a moment his expression shifted. Something resembling thoughtfulness crossed his face. But then it was gone, replaced by the cold smirk. "I know you hate me." He stepped closer, forcing her back against the wall. "But you'll learn to accept me, little dove. I always get what I want." Alice turned her face away, her jaw clenched so tight it ached. Grayson exhaled through his nose, then laughed softly. "I'll give you tonight to settle in. But tomorrow? Tomorrow you start acting like my wife." With that he turned and left, shutting the door behind him. Alice stood frozen, barely breathing, barely thinking. Outside, the sound of drunken laughter and gunfire filled the night. Inside, she felt the walls closing in. She sank to the bed, staring at the wooden slats of the floor. This was her life now. A cage, locked tight with no key. But in the distance, past the towering pines, past the rolling hills, there was another shadow, moving through the dark. A hunter. A man with no allegiance to the law or to outlaws. A man who had come to kill Silas Grayson. And whether he knew it yet or not, he had also come to save her. The wind carried the scent of damp earth and pine through the trees as Ronan, White Fox, crouched at the ridgeline, his sharp gaze fixed on the outlaw camp below. A collection of cabins and makeshift tents sprawled across the valley, dimly lit by flickering lanterns and the glow of a central fire. Men laughed and shouted, their voices rough with whiskey, unaware of the predator watching from the shadows. Ronan had been trailing Silas Grayson for days, moving like a ghost through the wilderness, waiting for the right moment to strike. Tonight, that moment had come. The camp was alive with celebration. Half the men were drunk, the others too distracted by gambling and women to notice the silent figure slipping between the trees. He adjusted the tomahawk at his hip and the knife strapped to his thigh, every motion deliberate, every breath controlled. He had killed men before, but this time was different. This time it was for a woman he had never met, Alice Miller. The name meant little to him beyond the promise he had made to her mother. But there was something about the situation that burned in his blood. He had seen women forced into lives they never chose. He had seen the look in their eyes, the silent, desperate plea for escape. No one had ever come for them. Tonight, someone would. Ronan moved like a shadow, slipping. Past the outer guards, the first man sat slumped against a barrel, his rifle across his lap, head nodding forward. Ronan drew his knife and stepped behind him, one hand clamping over the man's mouth as he drove the blade into his throat. The body jerked, then went, still. He wiped the knife clean on the man's coat and moved on. Another guard leaned against the side of a cabin, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. Ronan crept up behind him, wrapped an arm around his throat and wrenched back hard. The crack of vertebrae was swallowed by the wind, 2 down. The main cabin loomed ahead, larger than the others, its front porch lined with empty whiskey bottles. The men inside were too loud, their laughter carrying across the camp. Ronan ignored them. They weren't his concern. Only Grayson was. Slipping around the back of the cabin, Ronan pressed against the wooden wall, listening. A deep, gruff voice rumbled inside, followed by the soft murmur of another. A woman. Alice Ronan's grip tightened on his knife. He tested the door. Locked. No matter. He took a step back, lifted his boot, and drove it hard against the frame. The door crashed open. Grayson was already reaching for his gun when Ronan moved. The tomahawk flew through the air, burying itself in the outlaw's shoulder. Grayson let out a roar of pain, staggering back. Alice gasped, scrambling away from the bed, her wide eyes locked onto the scene before her. Ronan was on him in an instant. He drove his knife forward, but Grayson caught his wrist, twisting hard. The pain shot up Ronan's arm, but he didn't falter. He swung with his free hand, catching Grayson in the jaw. The older man stumbled, blood dripping from his shoulder, but he was still dangerous. A gunshot rang out. Ronan barely ducked in time. The bullet splintered the wall behind him. Grayson swung wildly, his strength fueled by rage. He tackled Ronan, sending them both crashing against the wooden floor. Fists flew, elbows landed, each man fighting for control. Ronan twisted, using the momentum to roll them over. He drove his knife downward, but Grayson caught his wrist again. The outlaw gritted his teeth, blood staining his lips. "You ain't killing me that easy, boy." Another gunshot. This time it wasn't Grayson who fired. The outlaw stiffened, his grip loosened. Ronan shoved him off, scrambling to his feet, his breath coming fast. He turned toward the source of the shot. Alice stood near the door, hands shaking, the small pistol still aimed at Grayson's chest. Smoke curled from the barrel, her breath hitched, her eyes locked onto the man she had just shot. Grayson let out a choked laugh, blood seeping through his shirt. "Should have known that you had it in you," he rasped. Then, with a final breath, he slumped to the floor, unmoving. Silence filled the cabin. Alice's entire body trembled. The pistol slipped from her fingers, clattering against the wood. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps. She had done it. She had killed him. Ronan watched her, his own heart still pounding from the fight. He hadn't expected that. He had come to end Grayson himself, but she had saved herself. A noise outside broke the silence, shouting, footsteps. The men had heard the shots. Ronan moved fast, grabbing Alice's arm. "We have to go now," she didn't argue. She let him pull her through the cabin, stepping over Grayson's body without looking down. The moment they stepped outside, the world erupted. Gunfire split the night as the outlaws realized what had happened. Ronan ducked low, pulling Alice with him as bullets whizzed past. The two nearest men raised their rifles. Ronan dropped one with a throwing knife before the shot could fire, then lunged at the second, taking him down with a quick, brutal strike. Alice barely had time to breathe before Ronan was pulling her, again dragging her toward the tree line. Shots rang out behind them, but the darkness was on their side. Ronan knew these woods. He had grown up learning how to move unseen. Within minutes, the campfire's glow was nothing but a flicker behind them, and the shouting voices faded into the wind. They ran until Alice could run no more. Her legs buckled, sending her collapsing to the damp earth. She gasped for breath, hands digging into the dirt. Ronan crouched beside her, listening. The night was alive with the sounds of the forest, rustling leaves, distant owls, the whisper of the wind, but no pursuit. Not yet. She lifted her head, her face pale in the moonlight. Is he really dead?" Ronan nodded. "He's dead." She exhaled, a sound between relief and disbelief. The reality was setting in. She was free. Her whole life she had been trapped, first by her father, then by Grayson. Now she belonged to no one. She looked up at Ronan, her expression unreadable. "Who are you?" He hesitated. "Ronan White Fox." Her brows furrowed slightly. "Why did you do this?" The question caught him off guard. He had expected fear. Gratitude maybe, but not that. He considered his answer carefully. "Because someone had to." She held his gaze for a long moment before nodding. The wind shifted, carrying distant voices. The outlaws wouldn't give up so easily. Ronan rose to his feet, offering her a hand. "We need to keep moving." Alice hesitated only a second before taking it. He pulled her up, steadying her when her legs threatened to give out. The forest loomed ahead, dark and endless. There was no clear destination, no guarantee of safety. But for the first time in her life, Alice wasn't being led somewhere against her will. This time she was choosing to run. The forest closed around them, thick with shadows and the sounds of night. Alice stumbled over roots and slick earth, her breath ragged in her throat. The cold air burned her lungs, but she pressed on, gripping Ronan's hand as he guided her through the underbrush. Every few minutes, he would pause, listening. His posture was taut, every muscle poised for action. He didn't speak unless necessary, and she had no words to give him. Her world had been reduced to movement, to the feel of damp leaves beneath her fingers as she caught herself from falling, to the pounding of her own heartbeat in her ears. They had been running for what felt like hours, the outlaw camp long behind. Them. The scent of wood smoke had faded, replaced by pine and the rich dampness of the earth. A stream gurgled somewhere nearby, its whispering current the only sound beyond their own footfalls. At last, Ronan stopped. "This way," he murmured, leading her toward a thick copse of trees. Hidden among them was an overhang of rock, partially, enclosed by moss-covered boulders. It wasn't much, but it would shield them from the elements. Alice collapsed onto the ground, her legs refusing to carry her any further. She hugged her arms around herself, shivering despite the exertion. Ronan knelt beside her, his face shadowed in the moonlight. "We stay here for now." Her breath came in gasps, her chest heaving. They'll come after us, he nodded. They will, but they won't find us tonight. His confidence should have reassured her, but she could still hear the gunshots, the shouts, the sound of Silas Grayson's final breath. It replayed in her mind over and over, the weight of it pressing against her ribs. She had killed a man. The thought made her stomach churn. Ronan pulled a flint from his pack and struck it against a small pile of kindling. A spark caught, flickering, to life, casting trembling light against the rock. He coaxed it carefully, adding dried grass and twigs until a modest fire crackled between them. Alice held her hands toward the warmth, her fingers numb. Ronan watched her, his dark eyes unreadable. "You did what you had to," he said at last. She swallowed hard. "It doesn't feel that way." He reached into his satchel, pulled out a strip of dried meat, and offered it to her. She hesitated before taking it. The first bite was tough, but she barely tasted it. "You never killed before." It wasn't a question. She shook her head. Ronan tore off a piece of jerky with his teeth. "Most people don't, until the moment comes. Until they're standing at the edge, looking down, and they realize there's no other way." Alice stared at the flames, her hands curled in her lap. "He would have killed you." "Yes. I didn't even think, I just pulled the trigger." Ronan studied her for a long moment before he spoke again. "You think it makes you a bad person?" She didn't answer. He leaned back against the rock, stretching his legs out in front of him. "There are bad men in this world, Alice. Grayson was one of them." He met her gaze. "You're not." The words settled over her like a heavy cloak. She wanted to believe them, but she wasn't sure she could. The firelight cast flickering shadows across Ronan's face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw, the scar that ran from his temple to his cheekbone. He wasn't much older than her, maybe in his late 20s, but there was a weight to him, a quiet burden that he carried. "What about you?" she asked, surprising herself. "Have you killed before?" His expression didn't change. "Yes." She waited, expecting more, but he didn't elaborate. Outside, the wind shifted, rustling the leaves. Ronan stiffened, his head tilting slightly as he listened. He moved like a wolf, silent, deliberate. Alice held her breath, straining to hear whatever had caught his attention. A moment passed, then another. Finally, he relaxed. Just the wind. Alice let out a shaky breath. She watched as he pulled a small pouch from his belt and opened it, revealing dried herbs. He dropped a handful into a tin cup, then poured water from his canteen. Holding the cup over the fire, he stirred the mixture with a twig. "What is that?" "Tea." She arched a brow. "You drink tea?" The corner of his mouth twitched. "It helps with wounds." It was then that she noticed the dark stain spreading beneath his shirt. "You're hurt." He waved her off. "It's not bad." "That's a lie." She sat forward. "Let me see." He hesitated before sighing and unbuttoning his shirt. The fabric peeled away from his skin, revealing a gash along his ribs where Grayson's knife had found him. The wound wasn't deep, but it bled sluggishly, dark against his skin. Alice swallowed. "You need to clean it." "I will. Now." He huffed a quiet laugh, but handed her the tin cup. "Pour it over the cut." She did as he said, wincing as the tea soaked into the wound. He exhaled through his nose, his jaw tightening. "Sorry." He shook his head. "You did fine." She reached for a strip of cloth from his satchel and pressed it gently against the wound, tying it as best she could. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Alice leaned back, pulling her knees to her chest. "Where will we go?" Ronan stared into the fire. "West," she frowned. "That's not an answer." He smirked. "It's the only one I've got." She shook her head, exasperated. "You killed Silas Grayson. His men won't stop looking for you, for us." "I know." She let out a slow breath. "I don't have anywhere to go." The words sat heavy between them. Ronan shifted, resting, his arms on his knees. "You ever been beyond that town?" She shook her head. He stared into the fire as though seeing something far beyond the flames. "The world's bigger than you think." She wasn't sure if he was trying to comfort her or himself. The fire crackled, the warmth seeping into her bones. She hadn't realized how exhausted she was until now. Her limbs felt heavy, her eyelids drooping. Ronan watched her. Sleep. You'll keep watch. He nodded. Despite everything, despite the terror, the blood, the chase, Alice felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. For the first time in her life, she felt safe. She let her eyes close. Ronan listened to her breathing as it slowed, his fingers tightening around the hilt of his knife. He knew better than to trust safety. Morning would come soon enough, and with it, the hunt. The morning came with the scent of rain on the wind. Alice awoke to the sound of distant birds and the low crackle of dying embers. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then reality settled in. Her aching limbs, the damp chill in the air, and Ronan's quiet presence just beyond the fire. He stood at the edge of the trees, his back to her, watching the horizon. His posture was rigid, every inch of him coiled in anticipation. They're coming, aren't they? Alice's voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. Ronan didn't turn. Yeah, she swallowed, her pulse quickening. How many? He exhaled, slowly. Enough. She pulled the tattered blanket tighter around her shoulders, her mind racing. She had known this was coming. Silas Grayson had been a monster, but he had been a powerful one. Killing him hadn't erased his influence. His men would want revenge. Ronan finally faced her, his dark eyes scanning her expression. You still have time to run. Alice's hands clenched into fists. No. His jaw tightened. If they catch you, I said no. She pushed to her feet, ignoring the ache in her muscles. I won't run. He studied her, searching. For weakness, for hesitation. When he found none, he nodded. The next few hours passed in silence. Ronan led her to higher ground, where thick brush and rocky outcroppings offered some cover. He handed her a rifle, an old, well-worn thing, but sturdy. Do you know how to use it? She hesitated, then shook her head. Ronan moved behind her, his arms steady as he guided her hands over the weapon. You don't pull the trigger until you're sure. His voice was low, even. You breathe. You wait. Alice tried to focus, but all she could hear was the echo of that night, her father's betrayal, Grayson's touch, the gunshot that had ended him. She tightened her grip on the rifle. A distant shout rang through the trees. Then another. They found the tracks, Ronan murmured. Won't be long now. Alice's pulse hammered in her ears. Minutes passed, stretched thin with tension. Then the first shot cracked through the silence. Ronan moved fast, shoving her into cover as a bullet slammed into the tree beside them. He rolled, drawing his own, weapon in a single fluid motion, and returned fire. A scream cut through the air. Alice clutched the rifle to her chest, breath coming in ragged gasps. This was real. The danger, the death, it was real. A second gunman appeared on the ridge, aiming for Ronan. Alice didn't think. She raised the rifle, just as he had taught her. She breathed. She waited. She fired. The man jerked backward, tumbling down the slope. Ronan spared her a glance, just a flicker of something in his eyes before he refocused. More men were coming. They fought like animals, wild and desperate. Ronan moved with the deadly grace of a predator, his tomahawk flashing between gunfire, striking quick and hard. Alice reloaded, fingers shaking. Another outlaw charged from the trees, and she barely had time to react before a shot rang out, missing her by inches. She scrambled back, gripping the rifle too tight. Then she heard a voice, deep, familiar. Well, now ain't this a sight? Her blood went cold. She turned. Thomas Miller stood just beyond the clearing, a pistol in his hand, a cruel smile on his weathered face. I figured you'd be dead by now, he mused, stepping closer. His eyes flicked to Ronan, who was still, fighting off the last of Grayson's men. But look at you, playing outlaw's wife again, are you? Alice's breath came fast, fury mixing with fear. What are you doing here? Thomas chuckled. I came for what's mine. She gritted her teeth. I'm not yours. He tilted his head. You're a girl without a home, Alice. No money. No family. He tusked, shaking his head. You should be thanking me. I found you another husband, one who won't mind that you've been ruined. She wanted to scream. Her father had sold her once. Now, he was doing it again. Alice's grip tightened around the rifle. I'd rather die. Thomas sighed. That's a shame. Then he raised his gun. A shot rang out. For a second, Alice didn't know who had fired. Then Thomas staggered back, his eyes wide with shock. He clutched his chest, fingers slick with blood. "You!" He coughed, sinking to his knees. "You!" Ungrateful little... Another shot. This time he crumpled. Alice's breath came fast, her whole body shaking. The rifle slipped from her hands. Behind her, Ronan stood, smoke curling from his pistol. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned with something fierce. He stepped toward her, cautious, as if unsure whether she would break. Alice let out a shuddering breath. "He was never my father," she whispered. Ronan nodded, understanding passing between them. The forest was silent now. The outlaws were dead. The danger had passed. Alice felt the weight of it all pressing down on her, threatening to crush her. Then Ronan reached for her. His hands were rough, calloused, but his touch was steady. She let herself lean into him just for a moment, just long enough to remember what it felt like to be held without cruelty. "You're free now," he murmured. She swallowed, closing her eyes. "I don't know what that means." His fingers brushed her cheek, a gentle contrast to the violence that had surrounded them. "Then we'll figure it out." She pulled back just enough to meet his gaze. For the first time in her life, she had a choice. She made it. She took his hand, and together they walked towards something new. The night smelled of pine and damp earth, the whispering wind stirring the treetops above the small cabin. The fire inside crackled low, casting flickering shadows against the log walls. Anna sat beside it, fingers curled around a tin cup of lukewarm tea. Her father, Nathaniel Carter, sat across from her, oil lamplight deepening the lines in his weathered face. He had the look of a man who had lived too long on the frontier, sharp-eyed, quiet, always listening to the land. Outside, her younger brother Thomas played with a carved wooden horse, dragging it through the dirt, making quiet galloping sounds. Their world was small but peaceful, perched on the edges of untamed land, where law was nothing more than a distant idea. Nathaniel had built this home with his own hands, settling here after years of pushing westward. He believed in hard work, in the strength of a man to carve out his own future. Anna had once believed that too, but the frontier was unforgiving. A low growl broke the night, distant yet unsettling. Nathaniel's hand drifted to the rifle resting against his chair. Anna glanced at him. A silent conversation passed between them. The wilderness was full of dangers, wolves, cougars, desperate men, but something about her father's stiffened posture told her this was no wild animal. Then came the sound of horses, slow, deliberate, hooves pressing into soft earth. Anna's breath caught. She rose to her feet, setting the cup down carefully as if afraid the sound might betray them. Nathaniel moved first, stepping toward the door. He gestured for Thomas to come inside, but the boy hesitated, still crouched in the dirt, his wooden horse in hand. A voice called from the darkness. "Evening, Carter." Nathaniel's face hardened. He knew the voice. Anna had heard it before. Too, Caleb Vance, an outlaw, the kind her father had always warned about. She had seen him once in town, leaning against a saloon post, hat tipped low, eyes like a snake's, watching, calculating. Nathaniel reached for the door latch but didn't open it. "Ain't got nothing for you, Vance," the outlaw chuckled. "That's so. See, I think you do. More hooves, more men." Anna's stomach twisted. Nathaniel turned, his eyes meeting hers. "Stay back," he murmured. Anna grabbed Thomas, pulling him close. The door exploded inward. Nathaniel staggered, rifle raised, but it was too late. Men surged into the cabin, 5, 6, shadows with boots and guns. The air filled with the scent of sweat and leather, the heavy press of bodies in a space too small for them. A fist struck Nathaniel's jaw. He stumbled but didn't fall. He swung his rifle like a club, striking one of the men hard enough to send him reeling. Anna shoved, Thomas behind her, heart hammering. "Enough," Caleb drawled, stepping inside. He was lean, his coat dusted with the road, his revolver already drawn. His dark eyes swept over the room, landing on Anna. A slow smile curved his lips. Nathaniel spat blood onto the floor. "Take what you want and leave." Caleb tilted his head. "I think I will." His gaze flicked toward Anna again. Ain't often we find something worth keeping. Cold fear lanced through her. Nathaniel lunged. A gunshot rang out. Anna screamed. Her father staggered back, clutching his side. Blood spread through his shirt dark and fast. Thomas sobbed, scrambling toward him. Nathaniel fell to his knees. His breath came ragged. He tried to reach for Thomas, for Anna, but his strength was already fading. "Run!" he gasped. "Go! Caleb!" Grabbed Anna before she could move. She fought, kicked, bit, but he was stronger. His grip was iron, his laugh sharp and cruel. "Fiery one, ain't you?" The cabin burned behind her as they dragged her outside. Thomas cried out, but the sound faded, lost in the chaos. She saw the firelight dancing in his eyes as the world turned to darkness. They threw her over a horse, the ground blurred beneath. Her wrists bound, her body aching. The night swallowed them whole. The journey was relentless. The outlaws rode hard, pushing through dense forest and open plains, their laughter ringing through the night like echoes of some twisted nightmare. Anna fought the ropes binding her wrists, her skin raw and bleeding. Her body swayed with the motion of the horse, exhaustion clawing at her. She had no way of knowing how far they had traveled, only that dawn was breaking when they finally slowed. A river stretched before them, dark and winding. Caleb dismounted, yanking her down with him. She hit the ground hard, knees buckling. He crouched beside her. "Now listen close, sweetheart. You keep fighting, and it won't end well for you. You do as I say, you might live to see next week." She glared at him, breath coming fast. "You killed my father," he smirked. "I've killed plenty of men." A wave of hatred burned through her, hotter than the sun rising over the trees. She wanted to kill him, to tear at him with her bare hands. But she had no weapons, no strength. One of the men tossed her a scrap of bread. "Eat." She didn't move. Caleb sighed. "Suit yourself." He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. "You ain't got a choice, girl. You're ours now." Her pulse pounded. No, she would never belong to them. She just had to wait, watch, plan. The first chance she got, she would run. The second night, she tried. She waited until they were asleep, the fire burning low. Her wrists had been loosened just enough. She worked at the rope, teeth clenching as fibers bit into her skin. She had minutes, maybe seconds. Then, freedom. She ran. Barefoot, blind in the darkness, she pushed through the trees. Branches clawed at her, her lungs burned, her legs screamed for rest. But she didn't stop. A shout behind her. They had noticed. Panic surged through her, but she kept moving, heart pounding like war drums. Then, a hand closed around her hair, yanking her back. She hit the ground hard, the air torn from her lungs. Caleb stood over her, face twisted with something between amusement and fury. "You really are something, ain't you?" She clawed at the dirt, but he hauled her up, dragging her back to camp. The others stirred, murmuring. One of them laughed. Caleb shoved her down near the fire. "Try that again, and I'll break your damn legs." Tears burned her eyes. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She turned her face away, staring into the flames. Her father had died trying to protect her. Thomas was gone, lost to the smoke and chaos. She was alone, but she was still breathing, and, as long as she breathed, she would fight. The night pressed down on the outlaw camp, thick and suffocating. The fire burned low, embers crackling in the pit, sending thin wisps of smoke into the starlit sky. Anna sat apart from the men, her back pressed against a fallen log, hands bound once more. She barely felt the ache in her wrists anymore, the rawness of her skin numbed by exhaustion. Her body had long since surrendered to pain, but her mind remained sharp, restless. She watched Caleb from the corner of her eye. He lounged near the fire, sharpening his knife, the flickering light casting his face in harsh angles. He had been in good spirits since her failed escape. There was a twisted pleasure in the way he broke people down. He had made it clear that he was watching her, waiting for her to try again, waiting to remind her how useless it was. A coyote howled somewhere in the distance. The horses shifted, snorting as if sensing something unseen. One of the outlaws stirred. Glancing toward the darkness beyond the fire's glow, Anna felt it too, a change in the air. The trees stood too still. The night had swallowed its usual sounds. No rustling, no wind through the branches, only an unnatural silence stretching across the land. She tensed. The first arrow struck swift and silent. A soft thud, a strangled gasp. A man fell sideways into the fire, his body convulsing as flames licked at his clothing. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. Shouts erupted. Gunfire cracked the silence. Chaos exploded around her. The outlaws scrambled for their weapons, cursing as dark shapes moved through the trees, silent, swift, relentless. Anna pressed herself against the ground, heart hammering, eyes wide. She saw them then. Warriors on horseback, faces painted with streaks of red and black, their long braids whipping through the air. The Comanche had come like ghosts, striking without warning, without sound. Another outlaw fell, an arrow lodged in his throat. A knife flashed in the firelight, cutting down another. Caleb roared in frustration, pistol in hand, firing wildly into the darkness. A figure loomed over Anna. She gasped, scrambling back, but the warrior's eyes locked onto hers. A sharp, commanding gaze. His face was streaked with war paint, his expression unreadable. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his presence overpowering. Then he was gone, swept back into the battle. Anna barely had time to process before a hand grabbed her, dragging her up. Caleb. His fingers dug into her arm, yanking her toward the horses. "We're leaving," he growled. She struggled, twisting against his grip, but he was too strong. He shoved her forward, reaching for his saddle. A sharp whistle cut through the air. The horse beneath Caleb shrieked, rearing back. An arrow jutted from its side. Caleb stumbled, cursing. Anna saw her chance. She drove her elbow into his ribs, hard enough to make him stagger. Then she ran. Her legs burned, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she sprinted toward the trees, toward the warriors still locked in battle. She didn't care where she went, only that she got away. A shadow moved in her path. She barely had time to register the warrior before he caught her wrist, stopping her dead in her tracks. Panic surged through her. She twisted, trying to break free, but his grip held firm. "Stop!" he commanded. His voice was deep, steady. She stilled. The fight was over. The outlaws were either dead or had fled into the darkness. The Comanche moved swiftly, checking bodies, gathering horses. A few warriors watched her warily, murmuring among themselves. The man still holding her wrist studied her, his grip strong but not painful. Up close she could see the sharp angles of his face, the dark intensity in his eyes. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps mid-20s. His presence was commanding, but there was no cruelty in his gaze. He released her. She staggered, back, breath unsteady. She had no idea what to expect. One of the warriors approached, speaking in their language. She couldn't understand the words, but she caught the question in his tone, the way he gestured toward her. The tall warrior, the leader, she realized, responded in a firm, measured voice. The others nodded. Then he turned to her. "You are coming with us," he said, his English accented but clear. Anna swallowed hard. She had no choice. She nodded. They moved swiftly, disappearing into the night. Dawn was a golden shimmer over the plains by the time they stopped. The Comanche camp sat nestled in a valley, hidden from sight. Dozens of teepees stretched out before her, their painted surfaces glowing under the rising sun. Smoke curled from cook fires, the scent of roasting meat drifting through the air. Anna stood frozen, uncertain. A group of women and children had already gathered, watching her with wary curiosity. She felt exposed beneath their gazes, aware of how out of place she looked. Her torn dress, dirt-streaked skin, wild hair tangled around her face. The warrior, who had taken her from the battlefield, dismounted and turned to her. "I am Tahu," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You are safe here." Safe. The word felt foreign. Anna swallowed, glancing around. The other warriors were already dispersing, some leading horses away, others speaking in low tones. The women continued to watch her, whispering among themselves. One of them stepped forward. She was older, her long grey-streaked hair braided down her back. Her face was lined, but her eyes were warm. She reached out, touching Anna's arm gently. "Come." Anna hesitated, glancing at Tahu. He gave a small nod. She followed. The woman led her to a nearby teepee, motioning for her to sit. A younger woman brought a bowl of water and a cloth. Without a word, the elder woman knelt and began cleaning the dirt from Anna's face. The simple kindness made something in her chest tighten. She had not been touched gently in weeks. She closed her eyes, letting herself breathe. Days passed. The Comanche did not treat her as a prisoner. They did not lock her away, did not bind her hands. But she was watched, always watched. She learned the names of those around her. The elder woman was Nokoni. She spoke little English, but had a way of making herself understood. The younger woman, Ayoka, was the one who brought her food, helped her wash, even offered her a fresh dress. Anna accepted these kindnesses, but she did not speak much. She did not know how to place herself in this world. She did not know what they expected from her. Tahu was never far. She saw him often, speaking with other warriors, overseeing the camp. He was respected, feared even, but never cruel. He moved with quiet authority, his presence commanding without words. She caught him watching her sometimes, studying her with the same unreadable expression he had worn that first night. She did not know what to make of him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in gold and crimson, he approached her. "You do not ask questions," he said. She looked up from where she sat near the fire. "What would I ask?" Tahu studied her for a moment. "Where your people are, if you can leave." She swallowed. "Can I?" His gaze held hers. "Not yet." The answer should have angered her, but she only nodded, because the truth was, she had nowhere to go. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring into the flames. She thought of her father's blood on the cabin floor, her brother's cries lost in the fire, the men who had taken everything from her, and the men who had saved. Her Tahu sat beside her, silent. She did not know what this place meant yet. If she was a prisoner, a guest, something else entirely. But for the first time since that terrible night, she did not feel like prey, and that, at least, was something. Anna woke to the scent of wood smoke and the distant murmur of voices outside. The teepee. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and wild sage. For a moment she remained still, her body curled beneath the heavy buffalo hide that had been given to her. It had been days, perhaps weeks, since she had been brought to the Comanche camp, yet the weight of captivity still clung to her like a second skin. She was not bound. No one had threatened her, but the watchful eyes of the people reminded her that she was not truly free. She pushed herself upright, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Nokoni had already left, the space empty except for the neatly folded blankets and the low embers of last night's fire. Outside, life in the village had begun. Women moved between, the teepees carrying water, tending to children, grinding maize between stones. Warriors spoke in low tones as they prepared their horses, their laughter sharp as flint in the cool air. Anna stepped out, blinking against the morning sun. The moment she emerged, conversations quieted, eyes flickering toward her before quickly turning away. She felt the weight of their unspoken questions. What was she? A captive? A burden? A ghost of some other world that had stumbled into theirs? She wasn't sure of the answer herself. Ayoka approached, offering a wooden bowl filled with thick porridge. Anna hesitated before accepting it. She had grown used to the quiet kindness of the women, but it did little to ease the knot in her stomach. As she ate, she felt the presence before she saw him. Tahu. He stood near his horse, speaking to another warrior, but his gaze settled on her, sharp as a hawk's. She had learned to recognize his silences. He was a man who spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. He had not treated her with cruelty, nor had he extended the same easy kindness that the women had. He simply watched, waiting. Waiting for what? She did not know. After she finished her meal, Nokoni gestured for her to follow. Anna obeyed, her bare feet brushing against the packed earth as they walked beyond the main camp. The Comanche woman led her to the riverbank where several other women worked, washing, scrubbing hides, gathering plants along the shore. Nokoni handed her a bundle of herbs and mimed crushing them between her fingers. The scent of sage and mint filled the air. Understanding dawned. They were teaching her. Anna hesitated before kneeling beside the older woman. She had spent years surviving on the frontier, but this was different. She wasn't just fending for herself, she was learning their way. The realization made her throat tighten. She worked in silence, hands moving carefully, copying Nokoni's motions. The older woman said nothing, only nodded in approval. The others occasionally glanced at her, curiosity flickering in their eyes. They did not fear her, nor did they trust her. She was something in between. That night, as the fires burned low, Anna sat apart from the others, staring into the flames. The weight of the past clung to her shoulders. Her father's dying breath, the crackle of the burning cabin, the feel of Caleb's rough hands dragging her away. The world she had known was gone. She closed her eyes. A shift in the air made her aware of his presence before she saw him. Tahu stood nearby, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "You work hard," he said. Anna looked up, surprised that he had spoken. She searched his face for mockery, but found none. She didn't know how to answer, so she simply nodded. Tahu studied her for a long moment. "Come." He did not wait to see if she would follow. Anna hesitated only a second before pushing herself up. She followed him past the teepees, past the grazing horses, toward the open stretch of land beyond the camp. The sky above was endless, the stars sharp against the black expanse. He stopped near a corral where a small group of horses stood, their dark eyes reflecting the moonlight. "You know how to ride?" he asked. She lifted her chin. "Yes." Tahu nodded. He stepped forward, reaching out to a young mare with a coat like polished obsidian. The horse snorted, but did not pull away. Tahu moved with a quiet ease, his presence steady. "Not like this," he said. "You ride as white men do. Here the horse is not just a tool, it is part of you." Anna frowned but said nothing. Tahu mounted without saddle or bridle, guiding the mare with only the press of his knees. The horse moved beneath him as if they shared the same breath. He circled once before stopping beside her. "Try." Anna swallowed, stepping forward. She had ridden bareback before, but never like this. She placed her hands on the horse's back, muscles tense as she swung herself up. The mare shifted, uncertain. Tahu watched. "Do not force it. Feel the horse. Let it know." "You," Anna exhaled slowly. She adjusted her balance, loosening the tension in her legs. The mare flicked an ear but did not protest. A small flicker of pride bloomed in her chest. Tahu nodded, satisfied. "Good." They rode together beneath the moon, the silence between them not heavy but full. Days passed, turning into weeks. The world she had once known became something distant, blurred at the edges. She no longer flinched at the language spoken around her, no longer felt the weight of so many eyes. She worked, alongside the women, helping with food, mending clothing, learning the rhythm of the days. She grew stronger. Her body, once bruised and weakened from captivity, had adapted to the long rides, the hard labor. She no longer felt like a ghost drifting through this place. She belonged nowhere, and yet here she was not lost. One afternoon, she saw a commotion near the edge of the camp. A wild horse had broken loose, hooves tearing into the earth, nostrils flaring. Warriors shouted, trying to corner it. Anna's pulse quickened. She moved before she thought. She grabbed a length of rope, stepping forward. Tahu saw her. He did not stop her. The horse reared, eyes wild, muscles trembling beneath its sleek coat. Anna lowered her stance. She met the animal's gaze, heart pounding. She had seen Tahu do it, seen the way he moved with patience, with understanding. Took a slow breath. Then she moved. The rope snapped around the horse's neck, not tight, not cruel. The mare bucked, but Anna held firm, murmuring softly, her voice low, steady. The horse stilled, a beat of silence. Then laughter, not cruel, not mocking, but approval. She turned, breathless. Tahu was watching her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. She had proven something tonight. Not just to them, but to herself. That night, as she sat by the fire, Nokoni placed a small bundle beside her, a new dress, one woven in the Comanche style, a choice. Anna ran her fingers over the fabric, feeling the weight of it, the meaning behind it. She glanced at Tahu. His gaze held hers. She was not the same girl who had been dragged from a burning cabin. She had changed, and for the first time the thought did not frighten her. The night was restless, the wind shifting uneasily through the valley, stirring the embers of the dying fire. Anna stood on the edge of the camp, her arms wrapped around herself, listening to the silence beyond the glow of the teepees. Something felt wrong. A heaviness pressed against her chest, a quiet dread creeping into the edges of her thoughts. Tahu emerged from the shadows, his presence as steady as the earth beneath her feet. She had come to know the way he moved, silent, measured, like the key. Land itself had shaped him. He stopped beside her, arms crossed, his gaze scanning the darkness beyond the hills. "You feel it too," she murmured. He nodded. The stillness was unnatural. The horses sensed it, shifting uneasily, their ears flicking toward something unseen. The camp had known peace for weeks, but Anna had learned that peace on the frontier was never permanent. A single call broke the quiet, sharp, urgent. Then the sound of hooves. Anna's breath caught. She turned as warriors rushed from their shelters, grabbing weapons, calling to one another. The Comanche were always ready, always listening, and tonight they had heard what was coming. Tahu's hand found her arm. "Stay here," she shook her head. No. His grip tightened for only a moment before he released her. He knew she would not listen. Figures crested the hill, silhouetted against the moonlight. A dozen riders, maybe more. Dust kicked up behind them, the smell of sweat and gunpowder tainting the air. Anna knew the man at the front before she saw his face. Caleb. Her stomach turned. He had found her. The outlaws came hard and fast, their war cries mingling with the shouts of the Comanche. Gunfire cracked through the night, arrows whistled, horses reared, the battle erupting in a violent collision of flesh and steel. Anna ducked, heart-pounding, scrambling for cover behind a fallen tree. She saw Caleb cutting through the chaos, his revolver flashing in the firelight, his eyes locked onto one thing, her. She felt it before she fully understood it. This wasn't about vengeance. This was possession. Caleb hadn't come just to take her back. He had come to destroy everything that had touched her since she left him. A figure lunged toward her, one of Caleb's men, his knife glinting as he grabbed for her. She reacted on instinct, ducking low, grabbing a broken branch and driving it upward. It struck his ribs, not deep enough to kill, but enough to send him staggering back. Tahu was there before the man could recover. His blade found the outlaws. Throat, swift, merciless. He barely spared the body a glance before turning to her. Run, but she didn't, because Caleb was coming. Tahu saw him too. He stepped in front of her, shoulders squared, knife in one hand, tomahawk in the other. He did not speak. He did not need to. Caleb pulled his horse to a stop, dismounting in a single fluid motion. His pistol was steady, his smirk sharp. "Didn't take you for the type, Anna." His voice was almost amused. Trading one kind of savage for another, she clenched her fists. "You don't get to talk about them like that." His expression darkened. "You belong to me." Tahu took a step forward. Caleb cocked the revolver. "Stay where you are, Chief." The tension snapped like a coiled wire. Anna moved first. She grabbed a rock and threw it, the jagged edge catching Caleb's wrist just as he fired. The shot went, wide, missing Tahu by inches. Tahu was on him in an instant. The fight was brutal. Caleb was quick, but Tahu was faster. The tomahawk flashed, striking Caleb's gun hand. He cursed, stumbling back, blood dripping between his fingers. But he wasn't done. He pulled a knife from his belt, lunging forward, aiming for Tahu's ribs. They collided, fists and blades, both men relentless. Caleb fought with desperation, with anger. Tahu fought with precision, with purpose. Anna could only watch, breathless, fists clenched, knowing that one wrong move could mean death. Caleb lashed out, his knife carving a line. Across Tahu's arm, Tahu barely reacted. He turned the movement against him, twisting, catching Caleb's wrist, driving him to the ground. And then the tomahawk came down. A sickening crunch. Caleb choked. His body jerked once, then stilled. The world seemed to hold its breath. The battle around them had slowed. the outlaws either dead or fleeing into the darkness. The Comanche stood victorious. Anna exhaled shakily, her pulse still racing. Tahu straightened, wiping the blood from his weapon, his face unreadable. She looked at Caleb's lifeless body, at the man who had stolen her from her home, who had taken everything from her, and she felt nothing. Tahu turned to her. "It is over." Her chest ached. She wanted to believe that. The wind shifted, carrying away the stench of blood and gunpowder. The camp stood strong. The people were safe. She was safe. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she did not feel hunted. She met Tahu's gaze. "What now?" His expression softened just slightly. "You choose." She swallowed, glancing toward the horizon, toward the world she had once belonged to. Then she looked at him, at the people who had given her a place, at the life she had begun to carve for herself, not as a prisoner, not as a survivor, but as something more. She stepped closer. "I already have." His gaze held hers for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. The night stretched around them, vast and endless. But for the first time she did not fear it. The frontier had taken everything from her, and yet, in its wild heart, she had found something worth keeping. The fire crackled, the stars burned bright, and Anna Carter stood, unbroken.